If you're new here, thank you so much for joining the family. Please hit the subscribe button so we can keep sharing inspiring stories like this with you on YouTube. The room felt too still, the kind of stillness that makes every small movement impossible to ignore. A pen clicked. Paper shifted, shoes scraped lightly across polished tile. And right there, at the center of it all, Wesley leaned back in his chair as if he had already won something. That smirk wasn't new, but today it cut differently. Wesley dragged the pen across the divorce papers, signing his name with the kind of confidence people had when they believed life would never humble them. "There," he murmured, nudging the papers forward. "All set." Octavia didn't flinch. She sat tall, legs crossed, heel tapping lightly in a steady rhythm. Calm, controlled, grounded. Not out of nerves, not out of fear. It was the rhythm of a woman who finally understood the truth. He really thinks he won. Wesley exhaled, attempting another smug glance as if this was the grand finale he'd been waiting for. But life had something far more powerful queued up. The courtroom door opened. The judge returned holding a large envelope, old, heavy, sealed in dark wax. She wasn't casual about it. She wasn't rushed. She treated it like it contained something that could shift the air itself. Wesley frowned. Octavia's heel stopped tapping. "Before I finalize this divorce," the judge said, "there is one final matter. This envelope was delivered by the late father of Mrs. Octavia, with instructions for it to be opened today." The smirk on Wesley's face loosened just a little. The judge broke the seal, unfolded the papers, and began reading in the quietest yet most powerful tone Octavia had ever heard. "This is the last will of—" Wesley straightened, hands clasped tightly now. "Addressed to my beloved daughter, Octavia." Octavia's breath trembled. Her father's voice echoed in her memory, not through sound but through the weight of his love. The judge continued, "To my daughter Octavia, I leave the entirety of my estate, including financial assets, land holdings, trusts, business shares, and the inheritance sum totaling $1,400,000,000. The courtroom froze. Wesley's smirk died on impact. His jaw dropped so suddenly it looked painful. The man who signed the papers like he was closing a casual contract now stared forward, as if the entire world had shifted beneath his feet. Octavia didn't move, didn't blink, didn't react, but inside her, a door opened. A truth rose. A power she never claimed stepped fully into the light. The judge folded the papers neatly, and just like that, the story began. Before we continue, please take a moment to like this video and leave a comment. Your engagement helps YouTube share stories like this with more people. And if this is your first time here, welcome. Make sure you subscribe so you never miss another powerful story on Mr. John Stories. The courtroom was quiet in the kind of way that made every sound feel sharper than it should. A pen clicked. Paper slid. Shoes tapped lightly against polished tile. The judge hadn't returned yet, and the tension lingered in the air like something waiting to settle in its rightful place. Wesley sat at the long wooden table, shifting slightly in his navy suit, tapping the silver pen between his fingers as though the whole room existed for him alone. He didn't look nervous. He didn't look uncertain. He looked like a man who believed the day belonged to him. He finally leaned over the stack of documents, flipped to the final page, and signed his name with a flourish that almost seemed rehearsed. He exhaled, leaned back, and let the faintest smirk curl across his lips. That smirk. Octavia watched him without blinking, her face unreadable, her posture dignified, her legs crossed neatly beneath the table. Her heel tapped a faint rhythm, not from nerves. She had left fear behind months ago, but from clarity settling in her chest, steady and unshakable. He really thinks he won, she thought, and the realization didn't hurt. It simply confirmed everything she already knew. Wesley slid the signed papers forward. "There," he said, tone clipped, efficient, all done. He didn't say her name. He didn't thank her for the years she gave him. He didn't even look her in the eye long enough to acknowledge the end of what they once pretended was love. Octavia inhaled slowly, letting the breath steady her spine. She wasn't the same woman who walked into this courthouse. Not internally, not emotionally. Something had shifted the moment she saw that smirk, something she didn't fully understand yet, but she recognized the feeling. Strength. Before she could respond, the heavy courtroom door opened. The judge stepped inside holding a large envelope. Thick, aged, sealed in dark wax. She held it with both hands, not casually, not indifferently, but with the seriousness of someone aware of the weight inside it. Wesley barely glanced up. Octavia did. Her heels stopped tapping. The judge approached the bench and cleared her throat. Before we finalize these proceedings, she said, there is one remaining matter. This envelope was delivered to the court per the explicit instructions of Mrs. Octavia's late father. The pen in Wesley's hand slipped slightly. Octavia's breath caught somewhere between her ribs and her memories. Her father? Today? The judge continued. He left specific directions for this to be opened at the conclusion of the divorce hearing. Wesley straightened. I'm sorry. What does this have to do with... This is not a discussion, Mr. Wesley, the judge said calmly. This is a directive. The room stilled. The judge broke the wax seal with deliberate care. The sound of tearing paper echoed louder than expected, slicing through the quiet. She unfolded the documents inside. Octavia's fingers tightened around the edge of the table, her heart thudding a slow, heavy rhythm. Her father's handwriting filled the page the judge studied. She recognized the boldness of his letters even from across the room. When she heard the judge inhale lightly, Octavia braced herself. This is the last will and testament, the judge began, of the late father of Mrs. Octavia. Wesley blinked, confusion shifting into something closer to unease. The judge lifted her eyes, reading directly. This message is addressed to my beloved daughter, Octavia. The word beloved struck something deep inside her, a word she hadn't heard in months. Her throat tightened. She lifted her chin. The judge continued reading. To my daughter, I leave the entirety of my estate. This includes all financial accounts, investment holdings, property assets, business shares, and a trust valued at $1,400,000,000. The words fell into the room with a force that shifted everything. The clerk froze mid-step. A guard in the corner lifted his head. Someone gasped quietly. Wesley stared ahead, eyes widening, color draining from his face as though the floor had been pulled out from under him. His smirk vanished without trace, erased as if it never belonged to him in the first place. His hand trembled. His jaw twitched. His breath stuttered in his chest. Octavia didn't move. Inside her, 1,000 emotions collided. Grief, shock, disbelief, but beneath them all, something else rose steadily. Understanding. Her father was speaking to her from beyond the grave, not with sadness, but with purpose. He hadn't left her unprotected. He hadn't left her without guidance. He had placed something in her hands that even she never imagined. The judge lifted the page slightly, continuing. This inheritance is granted exclusively to Octavia. No spouses, former spouses or future spouses, may make claims to this estate. The finality in that sentence cut through the room with precision. Wesley swallowed hard, shoulders collapsing slightly as the truth settled in his bones. The man who walked in certain of his upper hand now sat staring at a reality he could not change, control, or soften. Octavia felt her breath return, slow and steady, grounding her. The judge folded the documents gently. This concludes the reading. Silence held the room in place. No one breathed loudly. No one shifted. No one dared break the moment. The judge finally spoke again. We may proceed with finalizing the divorce. The stamp landed on the paperwork, with a sharp sound that echoed through the chamber, closing a chapter, opening another, drawing a clean line between what was and what would be. Octavia stood calmly. Wesley rose slower, quiet, unsteady on his feet. He looked at her differently now, not with arrogance, not with dismissal, but with something close to fear or maybe realization. He whispered, Octavia, we should talk. She turned just slightly, enough for him to see the calm fire in her eyes. For what? Her voice was soft, controlled, whole. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Octavia walked past him, each step confident, deliberate, a woman stepping into a future she hadn't expected but fully deserved. Wesley stayed rooted where he stood, staring at the empty space she left behind. The smirk was gone, and the room itself felt heavy with the shift that had just taken place, thick, intense, charged with everything unsaid. Before we continue, please take a moment to like this video and drop a comment below. Your engagement helps YouTube show stories like this to more amazing viewers. And if you're new here, welcome to Mr. John's Stories. Be sure to subscribe so you never miss another powerful story. The moment Octavia stepped out of the courtroom, the hallway lights felt brighter than before, almost too bright. The world outside the wooden doors didn't know what had just changed, but she felt it everywhere in her body. Her chest wasn't tight anymore. Her jaw wasn't clenched. Her shoulders didn't carry the weight they had for 2 long years. Inside her, something new was taking shape. Not pride, not ego, something steadier. Something her mother and aunties always said would arrive the moment a woman finally stopped begging life to be fair. Power. She exhaled softly, letting the sound echo down the hallway like a quiet claim to her new reality. Behind her, Wesley pushed through the courtroom doors with far less control. His footsteps were uneven, almost rushed, as if the floor had tilted without warning. The confidence he carried inside the courtroom had slipped right through his hands the moment her father's will was read. "Octavia," he said, voice softer than she'd ever heard it. She didn't turn around at first. She didn't owe the moment to him. She kept walking, heels sharp against the tile, posture tall and unbothered. Years of being doubted, hushed, minimized. It all seemed to fall behind her with every step. Only when she reached the end of the corridor did she pause. Not for him, for herself. To take in the reality that her father had left her not only wealth but freedom. A clean break. A rewritten future. Wesley approached slowly, like a man realizing he no longer had the right to rush toward her. "Please," he murmured when he finally reached her side. His voice carried a tremor he couldn't hide. "We need to talk about this." She turned her head slightly, giving him just enough attention to be polite. Not emotional attention. Not romantic attention. Just courtesy. The kind her father raised her to offer even to people who didn't deserve it. "There's nothing to discuss," she said calmly. She lifted one hand. A single gesture. He froze instantly. "That sentence right there," she replied, "tells me you weren't the man my father wanted anywhere near his legacy." His lips parted, but no words came out. Her father had been protective in ways she didn't always appreciate when she was younger. He believed in strength, integrity, and character. He believed in people proving themselves through actions, not through promises or carefully curated smiles. Wesley had failed that test long before today. Octavia stepped forward, leaving him behind once more. As she pushed open the courthouse exit, the Georgia air washed over her with its usual humidity, heavy, warm, familiar. It wrapped around her like home, reminding her of cookouts, family reunions, porch talks with her aunties, and the kind of strength only Southern black women understood deeply. Those women, her aunties, her cousins, her church sisters, they didn't know yet what happened in that courtroom, but she could already hear their voices in her mind. "Baby, keep your head high. Walk like the blessing is already yours. Remember who you come from." And today, for the first time in months, she felt like she was walking in the exact direction her father wanted her to go. She descended the courthouse steps, elegance in motion. Her strides were smooth, steady, confident, carrying the type of grace that couldn't be purchased, taught, or copied. It was inherited, carried down generations of women who had survived more than the world ever knew. Wesley finally caught up again. But this time he didn't try to step in front of her. He stayed beside her, a half step behind, unsure of his place, unsure of his words, unsure of how to approach a woman he used to know but no longer understood. "Octavia," he tried again, quieter now. She stopped at the sidewalk and faced him. No anger, no bitterness, nothing messy, just truth. "You wanted a divorce," she said gently. "Now you have it." He blinked at her, pupils tight, breathing uneven. "I didn't want this." She held his gaze for a moment, long enough for him to feel seen, but not long enough for him to mistake this pause for softness. "Actions have outcomes, Wesley," she said. "You can't handle me one way and expect life to return something different." The words hit him harder than anything the judge read. Not because they were cruel. They weren't. But because they held the weight of reality he'd avoided for years. She wasn't returning to the old version of herself. She wasn't going to shrink again. She wasn't going to silence herself for peace. Not anymore. Octavia turned away from him and lifted her face toward the sun. It glowed across her skin like a blessing. She felt her father's presence again, not in grief, but in gratitude. Behind her, Wesley remained on the sidewalk, still trying to steady himself in a world he no longer recognized. The stakes weren't money. The stakes weren't marriage. The stakes were identity, accountability, and truth. And for the first time, he realized he was standing on the wrong side of all three. Octavia took one last breath of warm summer air and walked forward, into a future she didn't ask for, but one she was more than ready to claim. Atlanta never stayed quiet for long, not when something worth talking about drifted into the air. And today, as Octavia stepped away from the courthouse with the sun warming her shoulders, the energy around her felt charged, almost expectant. She could sense eyes on her. Not in a threatening way, just in that Atlanta way, where people knew drama the moment they saw it and kept mental notes ready for group chats later. A pair of older women sitting on the courthouse benches paused mid-conversation as Octavia walked past them. Their gazes shifted from her to Wesley, who trailed behind in the most uncertain posture she'd ever seen on him. One woman whispered behind her hand, "Lord, something definitely happened in there." Her friend leaned forward. "Look at him. That man looks like someone rearranged his whole destiny." Octavia didn't slow down. She didn't turn her head. She simply kept walking, letting the murmurs sit behind her like background noise. The only voice she cared about today was the one inside her chest, the one that kept saying, "You made it out. You're free." She reached her car, unlocked it, and took a moment to inhale the humid Georgia air. The scent of the city, street vendors, faint exhaust, fried food drifting from a block away, reminded her of who she was long before she ever said "I do" to Wesley. Inside, her phone buzzed nonstop. "Auntie Brenda, baby, text me the moment you done. I got oil and advice if you need either one. Sorority sister chat. We don't care what time it is. We're ready to ride. Auntie Cheryl, bring yourself to my house. I got peach cobbler and judgment waiting." Octavia laughed under her breath. The messages weren't just funny. They were grounding. They were reminders that family didn't always need details to offer support. They simply showed up the way Atlanta aunties always did, loud, loving, and ready to step in with food or opinions. She placed her phone on the seat beside her and rested both hands on the steering wheel. The quiet wrapped around her like a soft blanket. No judge, no legal papers, no smirk, no expectations. Just silence and her breath. For the first time since the marriage began falling apart, she felt a stillness that didn't hurt. Across town, however, Wesley was living the opposite experience. By noon, word of something happening at the courthouse reached his social circles. Not the exact details. Atlanta didn't always need precision. It needed tone. And the tone was clear. Wesley had walked in confident and walked out shaken. At a golf course in Buckhead, men in tailored polos paused mid-swing as whispers drifted through the club. I heard his ex walked out like she leveled up. Something about a will? Man, they said he looked like his bank account argued with him. No one could confirm the truth, but the rumor alone was enough to rattle the networks he relied on. Wesley had built his life on stability, presentation, predictability. Now, even without the full story, his image was no longer intact. Back at his home, quiet, immaculate, cold, Wesley sat alone in the living room with the divorce papers spread across the table. His signature stared back at him, bold and self-assured, but the man who signed it no longer existed. He pressed his palms together, elbows on his knees, head bowed. The room felt smaller somehow, the silence sharper. Every breath reminded him of everything he had misunderstood about Octavia. Her strength, her upbringing, her values, the parts of her he never bothered to understand. He replayed the judge's words, each sentence stinging harder than the last. Her father didn't trust him with her future. Her father didn't trust him with her legacy. Her father saw straight through him, something Wesley never expected from a man he barely made an effort to know. His thoughts spiraled into directions he'd avoided for years. Why hadn't he listened more? Why hadn't he invested emotionally the way she had? Why did he always walk into rooms assuming he held the advantage? Now there was no advantage. There was no marriage. and there was no pretending he hadn't played a major part in destroying it. Meanwhile, Octavia drove home through familiar streets, past murals celebrating black excellence, past the soul food spots that fed her childhood memories, past pockets of the city that always reminded her who she was before she ever tried to blend into Wesley's world. Her home greeted her with quiet, the kind of quiet she once feared, but now welcomed. She slipped off her shoes, set her purse down, and sank into the couch. The same couch where she endured countless nights of questioning, hoping, compromising. But today it held her differently. She leaned back, exhaled deeply, and the sound that escaped her wasn't exhaustion or grief. She laughed, soft at first, then fuller. A release she didn't know she needed, not because of the inheritance. She hadn't even processed the number yet, but because something inside her had finally broken free. She wasn't mourning anymore. She wasn't shrinking anymore. She wasn't trying to fit into a world that wasn't built for her. The laughter faded into a warm smile. Atlanta outside her window kept moving. Cars passing, people chatting, life flowing as always. But inside her living room, something shifted permanently. The foundation for her next chapter had been laid, and there was no going back. Atlanta didn't need official press releases to sense when someone's life flipped over. Word traveled through tone, expression, body language, and the pace of footsteps leaving a courthouse. By the following morning, the story, whatever version people managed to assemble, had spread across neighborhoods like wildfire. In the West End, the hum of hairdryers and laughter filled a black-owned salon as women took turns sharing what they heard about Octavia's courthouse exit. Aunties who'd perfected the art of storytelling leaned over shampoo bowls, gesturing dramatically with their combs. One stylist, rolling a section of hair, said, "I don't know all the details, but baby, let me tell you," she walked out looking too calm. That's how you know God, ancestors, and good news were all in that room. A client with foils in her hair raised a brow. And that man? The one she married. He left looking like somebody unplugged his spirit. The room erupted into knowing laughter. Another stylist chimed in. Good for her. She spent years dimming her shine for that man. Sometimes life gives you a moment, and you better take it. Across the city, cigar lounges filled with deep-voiced commentary from men who prided themselves on knowing everyone else's business. They leaned back in leather chairs, cigars burning slow, analyzing second-hand information like experts. "You hear about Wesley?" one man asked, tapping ash into a tray. Word is he came out the courthouse looking like the weather changed inside his skull. Another nodded. He's always been too sure of himself. Guess today wasn't his kind of day. Meanwhile, someone else added, his ex walked out breathing peace. You can't tell me she didn't win something. No one knew specifics, but everyone agreed on one thing, something major had happened. Even church groups caught wind of the situation. On group chats used for planning events and circulating midweek devotionals, messages rolled in like warm waves. Their words were layered with pride, curiosity, and that quiet assurance older churchwomen carried when they sensed a spiritual turning. While Atlanta's black communities responded in their usual expressive, humorous, and loving ways, another corner of the city reacted differently, Wesley's world. At a country club north of the city, conversations paused when Wesley's name surfaced. Men warming up for tennis exchanged glances. "Did you hear anything concrete?" one asked. "No details," another replied, tightening his grip on his racket. "But he's not acting like himself." A third man shook his head. He always seemed composed. "I saw him yesterday near the parking lot. Didn't greet anyone. Didn't smooth his hair. Didn't even check his watch. Something's off." In the locker room, whispers continued. He and Octavia must have hit a breaking point. He'll bounce back. Men like him don't fall apart. Not sure this time. They didn't know about the inheritance, but they knew enough to sense that Wesley had taken a blow he wasn't prepared for. Meanwhile, Octavia moved through the day untouched by the noise. She wasn't avoiding people. She simply didn't need to be anywhere except where peace lived. Her phone buzzed endlessly with messages from family, friends, and curious acquaintances, but she responded only to those whose words felt supportive. Her morning consisted of quiet rituals, brewing tea, opening windows, letting sunlight fall across her living room. The quiet wasn't heavy. It wasn't lonely. It felt intentional. Every corner of her home reminded her of different seasons of her life. The couch where she once cried now held her laughter. The hallway where she and Wesley used to argue now carried soft light instead of tension. And her bedroom, once filled with unspoken hurt, felt lighter simply because she no longer carried the burden of pretending to be okay. Instead of scrolling through social media or engaging in the conversations circling around her name, she stepped outside onto her balcony and watched the city breathe. Cars moved steadily. Children called to each other from the playground across the street. Neighbors waved as they walked their dogs. Life continued, but it felt different now. Her father's words from the courtroom replayed in her mind. Not the number, not the assets, but the way he addressed her. My beloved daughter. She hadn't processed it fully in the moment, but now that phrase echoed softly, comforting, steadying. He understood what she needed long before she did. He'd always been that way, seeing beyond the surface, preparing her for a world that wasn't always kind. Her phone buzzed again. This time it was her oldest auntie. A simple message. Stand tall today. No questions, no assumptions. Just direction. Octavia smiled, whispered a soft thank you, and set the phone aside. While she grounded herself in stillness, Wesley's world continued cracking. Members of his circle tried reaching out, but he ignored their calls. He wasn't ready to admit the truth, to them or to himself. He wished he could undo the last 2 years. He wished he'd listened better. He wished he understood the magnitude of what his marriage was before he treated it like something disposable. But wishing didn't undo anything. And Atlanta could sense his unraveling the same way it sensed Octavia's rising by late afternoon people across the city. Barber shops, brunch spots, bus stops, held conversations about the couple whose courthouse exit had captured attention without explanation. No one knew everything, but everyone felt like something powerful had shifted. And through all the noise, praise, whispers, and speculation, Octavia stayed centered. Her peace wasn't loud. Her healing wasn't public. Her growth wasn't for performance. She wasn't chasing a new identity. She was returning to the one she had before Wesley ever entered her life. The city could talk. The circles could whisper. The worlds could react. But Octavia? Octavia simply breathed, confident, grounded, and more herself than ever. The next morning rose quietly, with soft sunlight stretching across Octavia's bedroom like a gentle reminder that she had stepped into a different phase of life. The alarm didn't ring. She had turned it off the night before deciding she no longer needed to wake up on someone else's schedule, someone else's expectation, someone else's rhythm. Today she woke with intention, not the kind forced by responsibility or exhaustion, but the kind that follows release, the kind that makes a woman breathe deeper and stand taller without needing a reason. Octavia slid out of bed, wrapped herself in her robe, and padded into the kitchen. As she waited for her kettle to heat, she caught her reflection in the microwave door. She paused. She looked lighter, not in the sense of appearance but in spirit. The worry that once lingered behind her eyes had faded. The way she carried her shoulders had softened. The tension she used to wear like a second skin had peeled away slowly since the courthouse. She poured her tea, wrapped her hands around the warm mug, and let the steam rise into her face. For the first time in a long while, she didn't rush. She didn't multitask. She simply existed, comfortably. Her father used to tell her, "Stillness reveals what noise hides." She never understood that fully until now. When she stepped outside onto her balcony, the morning air carried a mix of city sounds. Distant traffic, a bird or two, a neighbor starting their car, the rhythmic thump of someone jogging down the block. Atlanta's heartbeat felt steady, familiar, grounding. She closed her eyes and let the warmth settle on her skin. This quiet moment was the beginning of getting herself back. Her healing routines began to resurface naturally. She turned on her favorite playlist, soft R&B, the kind that reminded her of cookouts and long drives and childhood Saturdays filled with chores and laughter. She stretched on her yoga mat, letting her body release tension she didn't know she still held. She journaled, writing not about pain but about possibility. As the morning unfolded, she walked through her home differently. Not as someone going through motions, but as someone taking inventory of who she was now. She stood in front of her mirror again, this time fully present. She fixed her hair, moisturized her skin, and dressed in something that made her feel like herself. Clean lines, simple elegance, a look that blended grace with quiet authority. Her phone buzzed. "Auntie May, you ate this morning. Don't be skipping meals acting brand new." Octavia laughed and typed back, "I'm fine, promise." Another message followed almost immediately. "Auntie May, good. Just making sure. Proud of you." The words sank into her chest, warm and steady. She didn't tell her auntie about the inheritance yet. That wasn't out of secrecy, it was out of respect. Some news needed grounding before it could be spoken aloud. Some blessings needed preparation before they could be shared. Her father's teachings echoed again. "Money will expand who you already are. Make sure you like the woman you're expanding." She repeated that line in her mind, letting it settle. Later in the day, she opened the thick envelope the judge gave her. Carefully, slowly. She read through the details of the inheritance. Land her father had purchased decades ago. Investments he quietly nurtured. Business shares he acquired little by little. He had been preparing this future long before she ever knew she needed it. There were letters, too. Short notes he'd written over the years, each one carrying a different lesson. Not instructions, not demands. Wisdom. One said, "Never shrink for others. Grow until they learn how to approach you." Another read, "The world will test your confidence. Keep a version of yourself no one can touch." By the time she reached the final note, her throat tightened. Build a life you can stand on, whether you stand alone or with someone beside you. She pressed the paper to her chest, closed her eyes, and let the message settle deep into her. Her father hadn't just left her wealth. He left her guidance, protection, understanding, a roadmap back to herself. The rest of the afternoon moved with grace. She walked through her neighborhood, head high, taking in the simplicity of people living their lives. Kids laughing, elders chatting on porches, a street vendor frying something that smelled too good to resist. Everything felt familiar, yet new. Not because her circumstances changed, but because she had changed. Even as messages buzzed through her phone about what people thought happened at the courthouse, she didn't let it touch her spirit. Atlanta could talk. Atlanta always talked. But none of it mattered, unless she gave it meaning. She kept her focus inward. Later, as she sat on her couch with a fresh cup of tea, she thought about how life expected her to react to sudden wealth, with extravagance, with chaos, with flash. But her response was quiet confidence. No need for large announcements or rushed decisions. No need for revenge or spectacle. She wasn't stepping into billionaire life loudly. She was stepping into it honorably. Her father once said, "Money without grounding is a burden. Money with meaning is a tool." She intended to use every resource wisely, intentionally, with the kind of integrity she learned from the community that raised her. She curled her legs under her, leaned back, and let her body sink into the couch. Rediscovery wasn't dramatic. It wasn't a performance. It wasn't a show. It was a steady return to herself. One breath, one choice, one quiet moment at a time. Tomorrow would bring new responsibilities, decisions, and challenges. But today was about reclaiming her identity, and she was doing it beautifully. Wesley's home had never felt quiet before. It had always hummed with background noise. Emails pinging, the distant sound of sports commentary, the clink of ice in a glass, footsteps echoing across polished floors. But now, silence draped over every surface, heavy and uninvited. He sat on the edge of his couch, elbows resting on his knees, hands dangling between them. The divorce papers lay on the coffee table, illuminated by a beam of late afternoon light. His signature stared back at him, bold and confident, as if it belonged to someone else entirely. A day ago, he believed signing those documents gave him certainty, clarity, control. Today, the sight of his own handwriting made his stomach knot. He hadn't slept. His thoughts chased each other endlessly, scenes from the courtroom, the judge's voice, the weight of that envelope, and Octavia's face when she realized her father had safeguarded her in ways Wesley never imagined. He rubbed both hands over his face, exhaling slowly. The truth was settling into him, not like a shock, not like a single moment, but like a quiet, steady collapse. He had lost her long before the divorce. but now he had to sit with what that meant. He leaned forward and reached for the small velvet box he once used for his proposal. It wasn't tucked away in storage. It wasn't hidden. It sat on the bookshelf behind him as if he kept it close all this time without realizing why. He opened it. The wedding ring inside looked heavier than he ever remembered. Smooth, polished, untouched. He pulled it out slowly, holding it between his fingers. The cool metal pressed against his skin, grounding him in a way that felt unfair. He turned it over in his palm, staring at it long enough for memories to surface. He remembered the charity gala where they met. He had been uncomfortable, out of place, unsure how to navigate a room filled with people who didn't operate the way his circles did. Octavia's presence had been the only thing that felt real. Her laugh, her keen observations, the way she carried herself with ease. He remembered how drawn he felt to her strength. Not threatened at first, curious. She challenged him without raising her voice. She made him feel seen and called higher at the same time. But somewhere along the way he shifted from admiration to defensiveness. Her confidence started to intimidate him. Her independence unsettled him, and instead of confronting his insecurities, he masked them behind control, criticism, and distance. Now, holding the ring, he saw it all clearly. Every moment he shut her down when she tried to express herself, every conversation he rushed through, every time he dismissed her cultural experiences because they weren't familiar to him. He whispered into the empty room, "I didn't deserve her." The words trembled as they left his mouth. He set the ring on his palm again. The light caught it, reflecting a thin line across his hand. He curled his fingers, but he couldn't close his fist around it. It wasn't his anymore. It hadn't been for a long time. His throat tightened. He placed the ring on the table beside the papers, but even then he couldn't step away. His eyes stayed locked on it, the symbol of everything he let fall apart, not because he didn't care, but because he didn't understand how to care correctly. A deep breath shuddered out of him. He leaned back into the couch, eyes drifting up to the ceiling. His mind wandered through memories he had avoided all year, fights he caused, silence he allowed, moments he shut her out because vulnerability felt uncomfortable. He remembered her trying to connect with his world, learning his routines, understanding his circles, adjusting her voice to fit in rooms she wasn't designed for. She had bent herself in ways she shouldn't have. And he had barely noticed. He pressed the heels of his hands into his eyes. "What did I do?" he whispered. The question wasn't dramatic, it was honest, raw. A confession he never voiced until now. He paced the living room, unable to stay seated. Every step echoed louder than necessary. The house felt too open, too clean, too lifeless. He had designed it to look perfect. Sleek furniture, muted colors, pristine surfaces, but now it felt hollow. He stopped at the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Atlanta moved on without him, unaware of the storm gathering inside his chest. He lifted his hand to the glass, palm resting against the cool surface. For the first time, he wondered what parts of Octavia he never tried to understand. Her community, her traditions, her aunties and church sisters, her cultural grounding. He had viewed those things as background details rather than the foundation of who she was. He swallowed hard, voice thin. I failed her. He didn't try to hide the truth anymore. He didn't try to bargain with it. He let it settle, let it sting, let it reshape the man standing in front of the window. As the evening deepened, he returned to the couch. His eyes traced the outline of the ring again, then the signature on the divorce papers. Everything he lost sat in front of him, still and unchanged, while everything inside him shifted. He wasn't grieving wealth. He wasn't grieving status. He was grieving her. The version of Octavia who loved him, the version who tried to build a life with him, the version who believed in their marriage long after he stopped nurturing it. He lowered his head and breathed out slowly. This wasn't the collapse of a marriage. It was the collapse of an identity built on assumptions and pride, a humbling he never saw coming. But now that it had arrived, he knew he couldn't ignore it, not if he wanted to become someone better than the man who walked into that courtroom smirking. And in that quiet room, with the ring beside him and the papers sealed, Wesley finally acknowledged the truth that marked the beginning of his transformation. The greatest loss wasn't the divorce. It was who he had been when he still had her. The morning after her quiet rediscovery, Octavia woke with a stillness she hadn't felt in years. Steady, grounded, and unhurried. The sunlight spilled through her bedroom window in soft streaks, brushing the walls gently as if the universe wanted to ease her into the day. She stretched, inhaled deeply, and allowed herself to linger in that rare peace. Her life had shifted dramatically in a week, yet instead of feeling overwhelmed, she felt anchored. After making tea, she carried her mug into the living room and settled onto the couch. The cushions hugged her body in a familiar way, and for a moment she simply existed, watching the steam curl upward, listening to the hum of the world outside her walls. That's when her phone rang. Not a message, not a notification, a direct call. The name on the screen belonged to her lawyer. Her heartbeat steadied, not with anxiety but with curiosity. Everything major had already been addressed in the courtroom. What more could there be? She answered. Good morning, she said. Octavia, her lawyer replied, his tone polite but unusually cautious. I'm calling because something has come to my attention about your father's estate. She sat upright. Something else? I thought the judge read everything. There are additional materials, he said. Your father specified that certain items were to be reviewed after the initial will reading. Only after... Octavia's fingers tightened around her mug. What kind of items? She asked. A recorded message, he said, and a supplemental document outlining conditions. The word conditions wrapped itself around her mind and lingered there. Her father was a structured man, wise, intentional, layered. He didn't leave things undone, and he certainly didn't leave things without purpose. If he created additional conditions, they mattered. Her lawyer continued carefully. The judge would like both you and Wesley present. She believes the message is meant for both of you. Octavia blinked slowly. Her first instinct was confusion. Her second was acceptance. Her father never acted impulsively. Everything he touched had vision behind it. If he asked that Wesley be present, there was a reason, even if she couldn't see it yet. When? She asked. Today, he replied. If you're available. Octavia nodded instinctively, even though he couldn't see her. I'll be there. Thank you, he said. And Octavia, just prepare yourself. The judge said your father's message is very personal. She exhaled, steady and calm. I understand. After the call ended, she placed the phone on the table and leaned back, letting the moment settle. Her chest warmed, not with fear, but with the weight of something meaningful approaching. Her father had always been intentional about teaching her lessons at the exact time she needed them, even if those lessons came wrapped in discomfort. A quiet knock of reality tapped at her thoughts. Wesley would be there. Not the Wesley she once married. Not the Wesley who smirked over divorce papers. But the Wesley who walked out of the courthouse transformed, silent, humbled, stripped of the arrogance he once carried like a second skin. She closed her eyes briefly and breathed. Whatever this message is, she thought, Daddy wanted him included. She trusted that. By late morning, she dressed with subtle elegance, nothing extravagant, just a fitted blouse and tailored pants that spoke of quiet confidence. She styled her hair neatly and added simple jewelry. The look wasn't for show, it was for grounding. Before leaving, she paused at her father's photo framed on her bookshelf. His eyes held the same calm strength she felt growing inside her. All right, Daddy, she whispered. I'm listening. Downtown Atlanta buzzed as she drove toward the courthouse. The city moved around her with its usual mix of energy, people rushing, cars honking, the rhythm of daily life unbothered by the intimate worlds shifting inside its borders. But as she approached the courthouse, the familiar architecture brought back memories of yesterday's revelation. She inhaled deeply, gathered her courage, and stepped out of the car. Wesley was already there. He stood at the bottom of the steps, hands clasped, posture smaller than she had ever seen. He wasn't dressed in his usual polished confidence. His suit was still designer, but something about the way he wore it felt different, less armor, more honesty. When he looked up and saw her, he straightened, not out of pride, but respect. Octavia, he said quietly. She met his gaze without hostility. Wesley. A beat passed. Not tense, just unfamiliar. He cleared his throat. Your lawyer called me too. He said your father wanted me present. She nodded once. Yes. He hesitated. If you would prefer I wait outside. No, she interrupted softly. If Daddy wanted you here, then you should be here. Wesley swallowed, shoulders lowering slightly. They walked inside together, not side by side, but not separated either. An unspoken understanding held the space between them. The judge waited in a small private conference room, a sealed envelope and a laptop set before her. She nodded as they entered. Mrs. Octavia. Mr. Wesley. Thank you for coming. Octavia took a seat. Wesley sat a respectful distance away. The judge folded her hands. Your father left a recorded message that could not be played until after the initial proceedings. He also included additional instructions that pertained to both of you. Suspense thickened the air. Octavia's pulse settled into a slow, steady beat. She was ready. Whatever this was, she trusted her father's intentions more than she distrusted the unknown. Wesley kept his gaze lowered, not out of shame this time, but out of reverence. He understood he was not here as a participant in her blessings, but as someone her father believed needed to hear the truth directly. The judge reached for the laptop. Whenever you're ready, she said gently. Octavia nodded. Wesley remained still. The judge pressed play, and her father's voice filled the room. Warm, deep, steady, like he'd never left. The message had begun. Her father's voice didn't just fill the room. It settled into the air, warm and commanding in the way only a deeply respected man could sound. Hearing him again froze Octavia in place. Wesley lifted his head slowly, almost cautiously, as if entering a sacred space he wasn't sure he deserved to step into. Octavia? Her father began, the sound steady, familiar, and heartbreakingly clear. My girl. Her breath tightened. The way he said it made the room feel smaller, more intimate. She folded her hands in her lap, grounding herself. If you're hearing this, he continued, it means the first half of my plans have been carried out. It also means you survived something heavy. I knew you would. You always have. Wesley shifted in his seat, not restlessly, just affected. Her father's tone deepened slightly. I raised you to be strong, but never to carry more than you're meant to. I taught you to love, but never to disappear inside someone else's shadow. And I taught you to build peace, not tolerate disrespect disguised as stability. Octavia blinked hard, her throat tightening. The judge remained silent, watching the two of them with quiet sympathy. Her father continued, I saw the cracks in your marriage long before either of you wanted to face them. I watched you try to shrink pieces of yourself to keep harmony. And I watched Wesley struggle with the parts of you he never learned how to appreciate. Wesley inhaled sharply, not loudly, but enough for Octavia to hear. He didn't lift his eyes from the floor. But this message isn't meant to reopen wounds, her father said. It's meant to prepare both of you for what comes next. Octavia straightened slightly. Wesley lifted his gaze. The recording shifted tone, a deeper seriousness settling in. Octavia, my daughter, her father began, the wealth I left you is not a reward. It is a shield and a tool. I built it with the intention that you would never again feel small in spaces that weren't built for you. You are to stand tall, speak boldly, and live without apology. Her eyes stung, not from sadness, but from recognition. Every word felt like a hand on her back, steadying her. Do not allow anyone, family, partners, or strangers, to talk you out of the woman you have grown into. Your strength is not too much. Your voice is not too loud. Your heritage is not an obstacle. You are enough as you are. Octavia lowered her head for a moment, letting the truth land fully before lifting it again. Now, Wesley, he said. Wesley's spine stiffened. He looked at the laptop screen as if her father could see him. I am not a man who meddles in people's relationships, her father said, but I paid attention. I watched closely, not to judge, but to understand the kind of man who walked beside my daughter. Wesley swallowed hard. I saw potential in you, her father continued. Intelligence, discipline, ambition, even kindness in moments when you allowed yourself to be honest. but I also saw fear. Fear of vulnerability. Fear of inadequacy. Fear of facing parts of yourself that made you uncomfortable. And instead of confronting that fear, you projected it onto Octavia. Wesley closed his eyes. You didn't know how to handle a woman rooted in culture, community, and confidence. Instead of learning, you tried to lead her into rooms she wasn't meant to fit into. Instead of lifting her, you asked her to fit a mold she was never meant to shrink into. A long pause followed. Octavia's heartbeat steadied, slow and heavy. Wesley's breathing grew uneven. Her father continued, I do not leave you money. I do not leave you assets. What I leave you is a challenge. And this challenge will determine the kind of man you choose to become after this moment. Wesley's jaw tensed. Your challenge is this. If you ever hope to stand in Octavia's life again, even as a friend, you must become a man who can look at his failures without running from them. A man who can tell the truth, not just speak it. A man whose pride does not drown his sincerity. Octavia kept her eyes forward, her expression calm but deeply impacted. The recording went on. You must confront the insecurity that made you try to control what you did not understand. You must dismantle the ego that made you believe leadership meant dominance instead of partnership. And you must learn, truly learn, that love is not possession. It is respect. Wesley's eyes glistened with unshed tears, though he blinked quickly, trying to steady himself. That is the condition I leave you, her father said. Not because I believe you can win her back, but because I believe you can become better than the version of yourself you settled for. Octavia exhaled softly, relief mixed with gratitude. The message turned gentler. Octavia, he said, do not let your wealth isolate you. Stay grounded in family, in faith, in community. Use your resources with intention. And never forget, you deserve joy that is not complicated. You deserve a love that feeds you, not drains you. A beat passed. And lastly, release whatever guilt you carry. The end of your marriage is not failure. It is clarity. The screen faded to black. The room remained still, thick with emotion but not suffocating, just full, like everyone was still absorbing the weight of the words. Wesley wiped his face quietly, not dramatically, not performatively, just a man finally feeling something he should have faced long ago. Octavia sat tall, calm, centered. The judge closed the laptop gently, as if handling something sacred. She spoke softly. Your father spoke with tremendous wisdom. I believe his intentions were clear. Neither Octavia nor Wesley responded. There was nothing left to add. The moment had carved itself into them, and the air carried the weight of a truth that couldn't be undone. When the judge dismissed them, Octavia rose slowly, grounding herself before she stood completely. Wesley stayed seated for a moment longer, staring at the dark laptop screen as if her father's voice were still echoing inside it. Eventually he stood, shoulders slumped, not in defeat, but in humility. The kind of humility that arrives only when a person finally sees the truth with clarity. Octavia offered a courteous nod to the judge and stepped into the hallway. The click of the door shutting behind her was soft, but it felt like a turning point. Another threshold crossed, another chapter unfolding. She walked toward the exit with steady strides, neither rushing nor hesitating. Wesley followed at a respectful distance, his pace slower, as though he wasn't sure he had the right to approach her. When they reached the outer hallway, she stopped, not because he called her name, but because she chose to. She turned toward him, posture poised, eyes calm. Wesley approached cautiously, stopping several feet away. Enough distance for respect, close enough to speak. Octavia, he said quietly. His voice carried the weight of everything her father addressed: fear, regret, realization, and the painful awareness of what he had broken. She didn't answer immediately. Her expression wasn't cold. It wasn't warm either. It was steady, self-assured, and completely in control. Wesley exhaled and lowered his gaze briefly before meeting hers again. Octavia nodded once, inviting him to continue without encouraging emotional collapse. I thought I understood you, he said softly. I thought my way of living, my world, was the right one. I thought I could fit you into it instead of expanding myself to meet you where you were." He paused, struggling to steady his voice. "I see now that I asked you to carry the weight of both our identities. I asked you to do the adjusting, the bending, the smoothing over. And when you tried to hold on to the pieces of yourself that mattered, I made you feel like they were inconveniences instead of strengths." Octavia inhaled slowly, not out of irritation, but out of recognition. Hearing him articulate what she endured held a strange comfort, not because the words healed anything, but because they acknowledged reality. "You didn't want to understand my world," she said gently. "You wanted me to soften mine so yours wouldn't feel uncomfortable." Wesley shut his eyes for a moment. Her words landed with precision he couldn't deflect. "I know," he whispered, "and I'm sorry, truly." The sincerity in his voice didn't sway her heart, but it reached her respect. She folded her arms lightly, not defensively, but thoughtfully. He stepped closer, then stopped himself, maintaining the respectful distance. "I didn't lose you because of incompatibility," he said. "I lost you because I didn't respect the parts of you that came from a place I wasn't willing to learn about." His voice cracked slightly. "I didn't understand your family, your culture, the way your community supports each other. I thought my world was the standard. I thought success looked one way. I never stopped to realize that your strength came from places deeper than money or status." Octavia's eyes softened, not with romantic affection, but with compassion. The kind of compassion her father raised her to give, even when someone had fallen short. "It wasn't your lack of understanding that hurt," she said. "It was your unwillingness to try. You wanted love on your terms." Wesley nodded, tears glassing over but not falling. He held them back with dignity, not denial. "You deserved someone who wasn't intimidated by your voice," he said. "Someone who could stand beside you without trying to make you smaller. I wasn't that man." "No," she replied softly. "You weren't." They stood in silence for a moment, long enough for truth to settle, for accountability to take shape, for the past to close its doors. Wesley took a deep breath. "Your father. He didn't owe me a lesson, but he gave me one anyway, and I won't waste it." Octavia tilted her head slightly. "And what exactly did you learn?" "That strength doesn't have to shrink for partnership," he said. "That leadership isn't control. And that if I ever want to be worthy of standing anywhere near you again, even as a friend, I have to grow past who I've been." Octavia let the words rest between them. They weren't promises. They weren't attempts to win her back. They were acknowledgments, raw, honest, unpolished. Wesley's shoulders relaxed a fraction, not from relief, but from understanding. "I don't expect anything from you," he said. "Not forgiveness, not friendship. I just needed you to know I understand now. And I'm going to work on myself because it's the right thing to do, not because it gets me anything." A silence followed, quiet, steady, unburdened. Octavia nodded slowly. "Thank you for saying that." He searched her face, not for hope, but for closure. He found it, soft, graceful, firm. She turned toward the exit, pausing just long enough to say, "We weren't a mistake, Wesley, but staying would have been." He closed his eyes briefly, the truth settling in without resistance. When she walked away, he didn't follow. He stayed rooted in place, watching her step into the corridor with the assurance of a woman who no longer carried his expectations or his shadows. It wasn't reconciliation. It wasn't reunion, the kind that frees both people in different ways. And as the door closed gently behind her, Wesley understood that this moment would shape the man he chose to become next. In the weeks following her father's recording, Octavia shifted into a new rhythm, one that wasn't rushed, performative, or shaped by anyone else's expectations. It was a rhythm rooted in purpose, guided by clarity, and carried by the quiet confidence she had reclaimed. Atlanta woke up to her transformation long before she made any public announcements. Her presence in the city changed, not because she flaunted wealth, but because she moved with intention. People sensed something about her had expanded, even if they couldn't put words to it. Her first step was simple: reconnect with the parts of Atlanta that had molded her. She revisited local shops owned by families she grew up knowing, greeted elders sitting outside community centers, and supported young artists trying to find their footing. She had always been community-minded, but now she had the means to amplify what already mattered to her. One Saturday morning, she walked through a small marketplace on the West End. Vendors lined the sidewalks with handmade jewelry, natural hair products, artwork, and homemade pastries. The energy felt warm and familiar, woven with laughter, friendly debates, and the aroma of fresh food. When Octavia stopped at a table showcasing clothing designed by a young woman, the designer looked up with wide eyes. "Oh, Octavia, I didn't expect to see you out here," she said, adjusting a row of denim jackets decorated with bold patterns. Octavia smiled, running her hand over a jacket stitched with vibrant colors. "Your work is beautiful." "Thank you," the designer replied, cheeks glowing. "I'm trying to save up for better equipment. Been sewing everything by hand." Octavia nodded thoughtfully. "What would new equipment allow you to do?" The woman explained, voice full of ideas, larger batches, custom embroidery, a full website launch. 10 minutes into the conversation, Octavia felt her father's lessons stir inside her. He'd always reminded her that wealth wasn't about accumulation. It was about empowerment. "What if I helped you get started?" Octavia asked gently. The designer blinked, stunned. "You're serious?" Octavia nodded. "Let's talk about what you need. No rush, no pressure. But I want to see you win." Word spread quickly, but not because Octavia made an announcement. The community carried the story for her. People talked about her generosity not with shock, but with admiration. They knew she didn't throw money around recklessly. She supported intention, discipline, and creativity. Her next investment came from a conversation with a pair of young men who dreamed of opening a tech hub for teens in underserved neighborhoods. They had the knowledge, the passion, and the outline, but not the funding. Octavia listened to them present their vision with animation and focus. By the time they finished, she saw clearly what they wanted to build, a space where Black youth could learn coding, digital design, robotics, and entrepreneurship. Something her father would have championed. "How soon can you have a full proposal ready?" she asked. "1 week," one of them said without hesitation. "Make it thorough," she replied. "I'm interested." Their expressions shifted from cautious hope to pure relief. Octavia drove home afterward with the windows down, letting the soft breeze roll through her car. She didn't feel pressure. She didn't feel overwhelmed. She felt aligned. Her investments weren't about brand building or public image. They were extensions of her father's legacy, intentional, strategic, rooted in community uplift. Every decision felt like planting seeds in soil ready to grow something meaningful. At the same time, she was evolving personally. Her identity wasn't defined by her wealth or divorce. It was defined by the woman she chose to become every day. She took more walks in the park near her home, sometimes sitting on a bench and watching families, elders exercising, and children chasing each other with carefree joy. She found comfort in the simplicity of everyday life. Peace wasn't something she chased. It was something she allowed into her space. She attended cultural events, gallery openings, spoken word nights, jazz performances, reconnecting with artistic expressions she'd once set aside. At these gatherings, she didn't stand out because she was wealthy. She stood out because she carried herself with clarity, humility, and presence. People began recognizing her, not as Wesley's ex-wife, not as the woman from the courthouse story, but as a pillar in Atlanta's evolving landscape. A middle-aged man at a community meeting approached her after she asked insightful questions about educational programs. "You remind me of your father," he said with a warm smile. "You speak with the same calm conviction." The compliment touched her deeply. She didn't want to be her father. She wanted to honor the best parts of him by living them in her own way. As days passed, her reputation grew, not because she advertised herself, but because people respected her actions. Nothing about her rise was flashy. It was steady, thoughtful, and intentional. Her evenings were quiet. She cooked simple meals, listened to music, wrote in her journal, or sat on her balcony watching the city lights flicker like scattered stars. She celebrated small victories, the restored ease in her breathing, the absence of old tensions, the joy she felt in helping others. Peace, she realized, was her truest form of wealth. It allowed her to choose wisely. It allowed her to see her life as something she shaped, not something she survived. Her legacy was forming before her eyes, crafted by the way she poured into her community, by the way she reclaimed her identity, by the way Atlanta responded to her presence with pride and admiration. She wasn't just rising financially, culturally, purposefully, and the city saw her, not as a woman who inherited a fortune, but as a woman who turned that fortune into something far more valuable. She was becoming someone Atlanta respected deeply, not because of money, but because of who she was. Wesley didn't wake up one morning suddenly enlightened. Growth was slower than that, uneven, uncomfortable, and often quiet, but it began with a single choice, acknowledging that he didn't know how to fix the version of himself he had been. After the conversation with Octavia in the courthouse hallway, he returned home with a heaviness that didn't crush him, but forced him to see clearly. His house felt too large, too polished, too curated, yet empty in the ways that mattered most. He walked through each room like a man revisiting memories he had tried to ignore. Not memories of joyful moments, but moments where he shut down, deflected, or retreated into his own comfort, rather than meeting Octavia where she stood. It became painfully obvious that his relationships, romantic or otherwise, had always required other people to adjust for him, never the other way around. That realization stayed with him for days. Finally, he picked up his phone and searched for a therapist, not a life coach, not a consultant, not someone to tell him what he wanted to hear, but an actual professional who specialized in emotional patterns and behavioral blind spots. He found one. He made the appointment. And for the first time in his life, he walked into a room where he had to put his pride down at the door. The therapist asked him questions that cut straight through the surface. What do you believe partnership means? When did you first start associating vulnerability with weakness? What about Octavia's strength made you feel threatened? What expectations did you inherit culturally, spoken or unspoken, about what a household should look like? He didn't have pretty answers. He didn't have quick answers. He didn't even have complete answers. But he had honesty. Slowly, session after session, he peeled back layers of upbringing, habits, and beliefs he never questioned. He realized he had absorbed ideas from his social circles without recognizing they were shaping his behavior. The expectation that men led without compromise. The assumption that women adapted more easily. The belief that emotional expression was optional for men. And the unspoken message that cultural differences were obstacles, not opportunities. After one session, he sat in his car, hands gripping the steering wheel, staring out the window at nothing in particular. A truth surfaced that he had avoided for years. I never learned how to love without control. Not because he intended to be cruel, but because he equated stability with predictability. Predictability he tried to create by molding his environment, including Octavia. He remembered moments where she tried to share traditions from her community. Cookouts filled with laughter, family gatherings filled with warmth, church events filled with rhythm and connection. At the time, he participated politely but never fully embraced them. He worried he wouldn't fit in instead of simply trying to understand. His therapist challenged him gently. What would it have looked like to be curious instead of defensive? That question echoed in his mind well into the night. He began journaling, not eloquent reflections, but raw lines. I shut her out because I didn't know how to let her in. I confused leadership with control. I respected her strength, but didn't know how to stand beside it. I owe myself growth. Not for her approval, but for my own integrity. He read books about emotional intelligence. He listened to discussions about cultural awareness. He watched interviews that dissected relationships rooted in mutual respect rather than power balance. He wasn't searching for a shortcut. He wasn't preparing a speech to give Octavia. He was rebuilding a foundation inside himself. One evening after a long session, he found himself sitting on his bedroom floor beside the nightstand where his wedding ring rested. He didn't pick it up. He didn't stare at it with longing. He simply let its presence remind him of who he no longer wanted to be. He whispered to the quiet room, I want to be better than the man she had to walk away from. Not to earn her back. Not to rewrite the past, but because he had finally realized the kind of man he wanted to become didn't align with the man he had been. His social circle noticed something different about him. He wasn't defensive during conversations. He didn't brag about achievements. He questioned assumptions. When one man at the club made a dismissive comment about a woman being too outspoken, Wesley didn't laugh or gloss over it. He simply said, "Maybe she's just confident." His peers blinked in surprise. Wesley stayed calm. At home, evenings were quieter now. No background TV. No distractions. He cooked simple meals, read, reflected. He didn't reach for comfort in old habits. He didn't try to fill the silence with shallow noise. The silence, for once, was productive. As weeks passed, he noticed something unexpected. He no longer replayed arguments with Octavia to justify his actions. He replayed them to understand her pain. Growth had shifted from guilt to clarity, from clarity to accountability, from accountability to humility, and through it all, he never once considered asking Octavia for another chance. Not because he had given up, but because he respected her enough to recognize that her peace wasn't something he had the right to disturb. His transformation wasn't about returning to her. It was about returning to himself. And in that quiet, steady evolution, Wesley discovered something he never expected. Growth didn't feel like punishment. It felt like freedom. Weeks turned into months, and Atlanta shifted into a new season. Warmer days, longer sunlight, and a renewed energy humming through the city. And just as the city changed, so did Octavia and Wesley, each moving forward in directions that didn't collide but quietly aligned with the lessons they'd earned through pain, clarity, and transformation. Octavia's life blossomed in ways she never imagined. Not because of the money, though it provided doors she once thought were locked, but because she finally had the emotional freedom to walk boldly through those doors. Her community work grew deeper. Her investments took shape. Young entrepreneurs she supported began making progress, sending her updates that filled her with pride. Every time she saw a small business expand or a project she funded take its first steps, she felt connected to something larger, a ripple effect her father would have praised. One afternoon, she stood outside a renovated building in the West End, where the tech hub she funded was preparing to open. Bright murals decorated the exterior, painted by local artists who wanted to leave their mark on a space meant for younger generations. The organizers walked her through the rooms, computer stations lined up neatly, workshop tables ready, walls filled with inspirational quotes from Black innovators and leaders. They spoke to her with gratitude, but Octavia didn't center herself in the praise. She let the accomplishment belong to the community. "This is only the beginning," one of the young men said proudly. Octavia smiled. That's the goal. She left feeling lighter, her purpose expanding in ways she didn't need to announce. People talked, of course. Atlanta always talked. But this time the talk wasn't rooted in curiosity about her divorce. It was rooted in admiration. Her name traveled across meetings, social gatherings, local events, not because of scandal, but because of consistency. She wasn't chasing visibility. Visibility found her. Meanwhile, Wesley's transformation took place in quieter spaces. He didn't attend large gatherings. He didn't bury himself in work to distract from emotional labor. Instead, he created a routine centered around reflection and steady restructuring. Therapy became a weekly anchor. Each session peeled back more layers, some uncomfortable, some surprising, some liberating. He learned how his upbringing shaped him, how cultural assumptions guided his reactions, how he'd absorbed habits without questioning if they aligned with who he wanted to be. He also learned to listen, really listen. Not just to reply or defend himself, but to understand. That skill began spilling into the rest of his life. When he met with colleagues, he paid attention to perspectives different from his own. He asked more questions. He spoke less. When a friend casually dismissed a woman's ambition during a conversation, Wesley pushed back gently but firmly. "Ambition isn't a threat," he said. "It's an asset." His friends exchanged looks, not mocking, just surprised. They weren't used to him speaking from introspection instead of authority. Wesley didn't mind. He wasn't performing. He was evolving. The gatherings with Octavia's family where he responded with stiffness instead of openness. The cultural jokes he never bothered to understand. One night he sat at his dining table, flipping through a notebook filled with scribbled reflections. A single sentence, written weeks earlier, caught his eye. I didn't fail because I didn't love her. I failed because I didn't know how to love beyond myself. He closed the notebook gently. For the first time in months, the thought of Octavia didn't bring heaviness. It brought clarity. Their lives were no longer intertwined, but the lessons remained. And instead of longing for what they once had, he admired who she had become, from afar, respectfully, without intruding. Across the city, Octavia experienced something similar. Every now and then she thought of Wesley, not with bitterness, but with a quiet hope that he was working through his own unraveling. Not for her, for himself. There was no room for resentment in her new life. Her days were full, her heart was full, and her path leaned forward, not backward. One evening, she sat on her balcony overlooking the skyline. The golden hour washed Atlanta in warm tones, lighting up the tops of buildings and casting long shadows over the neighborhoods beneath them. She sipped her tea, feeling a peace so steady she could almost hold it in her hands. For the first time in years, she didn't wonder who she needed to become for someone else. She simply existed as herself. Her mind drifted briefly to Wesley, not emotionally, but thoughtfully. She hoped he had found the courage to keep growing. She hoped he'd let go of pride. She hoped he'd discovered something meaningful in the silence. But she didn't call him. She didn't check on him through mutual acquaintances. Their distance had become a sanctuary, a space that allowed her to expand and allowed him to soften. In two separate corners of the same city, they sat in their respective spaces, both looking out at the horizon in their own way, but no longer broken. Their stories continued, just not together. And strangely, that separation brought them something neither had expected after the divorce: healing. Sunday mornings always carried a quietness in Atlanta, an unspoken pause that settled over neighborhoods before the day found its rhythm. It was on a morning like this that Octavia drove to the cemetery where her father rested, the sky a muted blend of soft blues and faint gold. She hadn't planned the visit in advance. There was no anniversary, no reminder on her phone, no external reason pulling her there. Something inside her simply nudged her forward. Calm, steady, certain. The gates opened silently as she drove through, her car moving along the curved path lined with tall trees. The branches swayed lightly in the breeze, creating patches of sunlight that danced across the ground. She parked near the familiar row, stepped out, and took a slow breath. Her father's headstone stood exactly as she remembered, simple, dignified, and strong. The kind of headstone that didn't need flourish to make a presence known. She approached, hands clasped loosely in front of her, heart steady. "Morning, Daddy," she whispered. The air felt still, as if listening. She lowered herself onto the grass, sitting comfortably, letting the silence settle around her. For the first time since the will reading, she didn't feel overwhelmed or uncertain. She felt aligned. "I understand now," she said softly, her eyes tracing the carved letters of his name. "I didn't understand before, but I do now." She reached out and brushed a leaf away from the base of the stone. "All this time, I thought you were preparing finances," she continued. "But you were preparing me." Her voice didn't waver. It was grounded, steady, shaped by the clarity she'd gained over the past months. "You knew I would try too hard to hold everything together," she said. "You knew I'd stay in something long after it lost balance. You knew I'd choose patience over peace. That's who you raised, someone who doesn't quit easily." A light breeze moved through the cemetery, brushing against her hair and clothing. It wasn't harsh, just a gentle reminder that she wasn't speaking into emptiness. "And I know you didn't want to interfere," she went on. "You respected the choices I made, even when they hurt me. But you also knew there would come a day when I'd need something to catch me, something strong enough to remind me who I am." Her eyes softened. That day came in that courtroom. She thought back to the moment the judge read the will, the shock, the shift in energy, the sudden understanding that her father had seen her struggle long before she admitted it aloud. He hadn't left her wealth to ease her ego. He'd left it to protect the identity she nearly lost. "You didn't give me that money to change my life," she said. "You gave it to me so I could stop shrinking my life." The distinction was everything. She inhaled deeply, letting the air fill her lungs before releasing it slowly. "I've been investing in the city," she said with a small smile. "Putting money where you would have put your time. Supporting young people with dreams bigger than their resources. Pouring into the parts of Atlanta that shaped me." Her father would have approved. She felt that deeply. And for the first time in years, she added, "I feel at peace." Not the kind of peace that arrives after a loud breakthrough or a dramatic moment. This was a quiet peace, the kind that stretched itself gently across her chest and anchored her spirit. "I'm not angry anymore," she whispered. "Not at myself. Not at him." Saying it out loud felt like releasing a weight she didn't realize she still held. She looked out toward the rows of headstones, each one representing a story, a legacy, a life lived with its own trials and victories. Her father's life had been full, rich with community, wisdom, leadership, and love. He hadn't been perfect, but he'd been present. And now, in his absence, he was still guiding her, still shaping her path. "You knew my heart better than I did," she said softly. "You knew I needed space to grow, not space to hide. And now that I have it, I'm learning how to use it." She leaned back slightly, letting her palms rest on the grass. "I'm stronger now," she continued. "Not because of the money, because I'm finally standing in the parts of myself I used to set aside." The wind picked up again, rustling the branches overhead. "And I want you to know I'm okay," she said. "Truly." Her eyes glistened, not with tears of sorrow but gratitude. Grief and peace had finally merged into something balanced, something sustainable. She reached into her bag and pulled out a small white flower, placing it gently on the grave. "Thank you," she said, "for thinking ahead, for loving me enough to teach me even after you were gone, for trusting me with something this big." She let the moment linger, quiet, reflective, full. After a while she rose to her feet, brushing off her pants. She stood before the grave one final moment, hands at her sides, shoulders square, gaze steady. "I'm ready for whatever comes next," she said. Not dramatic, not forced, just true. She turned and walked back toward her car with calm steps, feeling lighter than she had when she arrived. Her father's legacy no longer felt like a mystery. It felt like a path he'd carved gently, intentionally, knowing she would one day walk it with confidence. As she reached her car, she paused and looked back once more, not in longing but in acknowledgement. "Love you, Daddy." Then she opened the door, stepped inside, and drove away, not from the past, but toward the future she was finally prepared to build. The cemetery was almost empty by the time Wesley arrived. The sun had shifted lower in the sky, casting long, warm streaks across the grass. He parked far from the entrance, not out of caution but out of reverence. He didn't want to intrude. He didn't want to appear as if he were claiming a moment that didn't belong to him. He walked slowly, hands in his pockets, eyes focused on the ground ahead. Every step felt intentional. He wasn't here to explain himself. He wasn't here to ask for anything. He wasn't even sure if he would speak. He only knew that the man who guided Octavia's life, the man whose words had reshaped his own, deserved acknowledgement. When he reached the row where her father rested, he paused. Octavia was already there. She stood still, facing the headstone, her posture calm and centered. The serenity around her was unmistakable. She didn't look burdened anymore. She didn't look like someone wrestling with shared history or unsaid words. She looked complete. Wesley hesitated several feet behind her, unsure if approaching would disturb her peace, but Octavia sensed him before he could decide. She turned gently, her expression neutral, neither surprised nor guarded. "Wesley," she said quietly. He lowered his head slightly. "Octavia." Their voices didn't carry tension. They didn't carry fear. They carried recognition. Two people who had walked through fire separately and emerged with clearer eyes. "I didn't mean to interrupt," he said. "You didn't," she replied softly. "I was just finishing." She stepped to the side, giving him space without stepping away entirely. It wasn't an invitation into her emotional world, but it was a gesture of respect. Their distance felt natural, measured, appropriate, calm. Wesley approached the grave slowly. He didn't kneel. He didn't touch the stone. He simply stood before it with quiet humility. "Sir," he said under his breath, "I don't know if I deserve to speak, but—" "Thank you." Octavia listened. Not intruding, not correcting him, just allowing the moment to unfold. Wesley continued, voice steady but low. I heard your message. Every word. And I'm trying. I really am. He paused, exhaling lightly. I didn't understand the depth of what she carried, he added. But I do now. Octavia watched him, not with pity, but with acknowledgement. She could see the changes in him. Not dramatic changes, not performative changes. Just a quiet shift in how he held himself, how he spoke, how he approached the world. When he finished speaking, he stepped back respectfully, leaving the space open for silence. Octavia broke it gently. You seem different. He looked at her, offering a faint but genuine nod. I'm trying to be. I realized I've spent most of my life prioritizing comfort over growth. That doesn't work anymore. She accepted the truth without fanfare. Growth didn't need applause. It needed honesty. I'm glad you're doing the work, she said. Not for me. For yourself. Wesley swallowed, grateful she said it out loud. That's exactly why I'm doing it. Another quiet moment passed, this one softer, lighter, without the weight of the past pressing between them. I know we're not meant to go back, he said. I'm not confused about that. I don't want to disrupt the peace you found. Octavia tilted her head slightly, appreciating the clarity. I hope you're finding your own peace too, she replied. He let out a breath, not weary, but relieved. I think I'm starting to, the version of me who stood in that courtroom. I don't ever want to be him again. You won't be, she said with quiet confidence. He held her gaze a moment longer, then shifted his eyes back to the grave. Your father was a wise man. He was, she said softly, and he wanted us to learn something from all of this. We did, Wesley said, just not in the way I expected. Octavia nodded. Sometimes clarity comes from separation, not connection. Those words landed gently, without bitterness. Wesley offered a small, sincere smile. You look happy, Octavia. I am, she replied. For the first time in a long time. I'm glad, he whispered. And he truly meant it. There was no longing in his voice. No hidden plea. No attempt to rewrite the ending. What lingered between them now wasn't tension. It was quiet respect. They both turned toward the horizon, where the sunlight stretched across the cemetery in soft amber waves. I should let you go, Wesley said after a moment. You have a life to live, a big one. So do you, she replied. He nodded once, firm, grateful, and stepped back. Take care of yourself, she said. You too, Octavia. He walked away slowly, not looking back, each step steady and self-assured. Not because he was leaving her behind, but because he was finally moving forward in his own direction. Octavia watched him disappear down the path, not with sadness, not with hope, with acceptance. Their story had found its closing page, and neither of them needed more than that. Octavia drove home from the cemetery with a quiet strength humming beneath her ribs. The city's skyline stretched across the horizon, glowing in warm tones as the day leaned slowly into evening. Atlanta always looked alive, but today it felt like something more, like the city itself had paused to acknowledge the shift in her spirit. When she pulled into her driveway, she didn't rush inside. She sat in the car for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, absorbing the stillness. She felt different, not in a loud or boastful way, in a grounded, deeply rooted way. Her father's message, Wesley's honesty, the closure at the gravesite, it all seemed to settle into one clear understanding. It revolved around becoming. She stepped inside her home, her space, her sanctuary, and felt the quiet embrace of peace. Not the temporary peace she chased during tough nights, not the fragile peace she tried to build during her marriage, but a steady, evolving peace she had grown into. She walked through her kitchen, past the living room, and stopped at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. From this angle, Atlanta looked like a mosaic of stories. Families preparing dinner, neighbors chatting on porches, entrepreneurs closing laptops after a long day, kids riding bikes, people dreaming. Her father had always loved this city. Now she finally understood why. She had work to do. Good work, real work, purpose-driven work. Her father didn't leave her money to sit on. He left her a responsibility, and she was ready. Over the next few weeks, Octavia threw herself into her initiatives with intentional care. She met with local business owners to understand their needs. She sat with students from Atlanta neighborhoods who dreamed big but lacked resources. She partnered with grassroots organizations that her father once supported. Everywhere she went, People greeted her warmly, not because she was wealthy, but because she was present, because she gave without expecting anything. Her presence in these spaces wasn't a performance. It was a continuation of her father's legacy, shaped by her own voice and her own vision. At one event, a young girl approached her shyly, holding a sketchbook. "Miss Octavia?" she asked. "Yes, sweetheart." Octavia knelt so they were eye level. "You absolutely can. And when you're ready, I'll help you get started." The girl's smile lit up the room. Moments like that became common, and they filled Octavia with something money could never buy: connection. Every night she settled into bed feeling lighter. Not because life was perfect, not because she had everything figured out, but because she finally knew who she was apart from marriage, apart from loss, apart from expectation. Her journey wasn't about becoming a billionaire. Her journey was about becoming free. She began journaling again. She returned to her Saturday breakfast tradition. She hosted small gatherings with women from her community, women who sharpened her, strengthened her, and laughed with her until their stomachs hurt. Slowly, she rebuilt the pieces of herself she had once tucked away for the sake of peace. Local newspapers wrote about her efforts. Podcasts invited her to speak on empowerment. Community members referred to her as a light, a leader, a continuation of her father's spirit. But Octavia didn't absorb any of it as ego. She absorbed it as confirmation. She was on the right path. Not the easiest path. Not the flashiest path, but the right one. She stood on her father's foundation, but built her own structure. Wesley stayed true to his word. He didn't attempt to reclaim space in her life. Occasionally, their paths crossed through the community or shared connections, and every encounter was respectful. Warm even, but distant. Once, he sent her a short message through their mutual lawyer. "I'm grateful for the part of life we walked together. You helped me see myself clearly. Wishing you peace." She didn't reply, but she smiled. He had changed. She acknowledged that. She respected that. But she had moved into a season where change was not enough to rewrite their story. Their chapter was closed. And closure didn't require bitterness. Just acceptance. One quiet evening, as she stood on her balcony, the breeze carrying faint sounds of the city below, Octavia reflected on everything that had happened. She thought about the courtroom, the shock, the shift, the reveal. She thought about the city's reaction, the gossip, the whispers. She thought about Wesley's evolution, his humility, his understanding of what love was not. She thought about her father's wisdom, how he managed to guide her even after he was gone. She placed a hand over her heart, feeling its steady rhythm. "I get it now," she murmured. "Everything led me here, not to wealth, not to power." And so, as Octavia stepped fully into her new life, these truths remained. 1. Wealth doesn't change people, it reveals them. Some will show gratitude, some will show entitlement. 2. Love without honesty becomes emotional debt. You cannot build a future with someone unwilling to face their truth. 3. Two cultures can blend beautifully when both sides choose respect. 4. Healing is the richest inheritance. A healed mind makes clearer choices. A healed heart protects itself with discernment, not walls. 5. Freedom begins the moment you stop apologizing for your growth. Octavia didn't rise to hurt anyone. She rose because she stopped dimming her light, and that, in the end, became her true legacy. Darling viewers, thank you for listening to this powerful journey of strength, clarity, and healing. If this story touched you in any way, please take a moment to like the video and leave a comment. Your engagement helps this channel reach more people who need stories like this. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to Mr. John Stories so you never miss the next life-changing tale. Your support keeps these stories alive.